All right, I've got just a little bit after noon, which is perfect. And we've got a lot to cover today, so I'm going to kick us off a minute or two earlier than we normally do. And I think everything is good. All right, awesome. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our March Dairy Girl Network Enhance Webinar, Colostrum Protocols, Finding Your Fit. Welcome. Happy Friday. I see there is some chats going about where everybody's joining from, and it sounds like a lot of us are enjoying some nice weather, which is a flip for most of us from last week or last weekend even, so that is great. If you're new to our Enhanced Webinar program, again, welcome. DGN offers these webinars, and they're open to the public, men, women, DGN members and non-members. Everyone's welcome. But of course, official Dairy Girl Network members get some special perks like a free webinar on your birthday month. So if you're not, make sure that you become a member of Dairy Girl Network at dairygirlnetwork.com, and you can hit that join tab. It's fast, free, and easy to sign up. You'll get those perks, and you'll just stay in the know of everything Dairy Girl Network has going on. So I'm Amanda Coles, and I am the DGN staff lead for our enhanced webinars. And I'm just going to kick off today with a little bit of housekeeping, a couple of announcements, and then we're going to jump right in. So first, I do want to give a very special thank you to Cargill for sponsoring this webinar and also being a national supporter of Dairy Girl Network. A couple of notes for all of you about interacting today. Throughout the webinar, we really do encourage you to use that chat feature. Let us know now where you're joining from. You can use that to also ask questions and leave comments throughout the entire webinar. You can even unmute yourself and ask your questions along the way as well. If you're worried about interrupting, there is a raise hand feature. So if your question is timely and you really want it answered around that moment, hit that raise hand feature, and then either myself or someone else from the DGN team will make sure to build some space for you to interact. If you'd rather just wait, we will have a dedicated time at the end for a formal Q&A. But again, you're welcome to ask questions and comments throughout the presentation as well. And something I do every month when we host these and that we all really like to do is build community. And with that, we really do love being able to see you, even though we're all joining virtually. So there's a handful of people already showing their video. Awesome. If you are able to, we welcome you to turn your video on as well. Doesn't matter where you are, what you look like, as long as you're not driving, just be safe. But we really want you to join and be a part of today's conversation. Okay, just a couple of Dairy Girl Network specific announcements that I'm really excited to share. First, we are really thrilled to announce that we have a new California Collegiate Connect networking event happening in San Luis Obispo, California on April 18th. I know Jennifer is joining us from there, and she is telling us that it is beautiful. And we're excited. We're hosting a luncheon Connect event at the beautiful La Lomita Ranch. And this networking event is going to be tailored specifically towards college students, though all are welcome to join for the networking and the presentation. We're really looking forward to having a mixture of students and then some established women in dairy in the industry and on farm in the room as well to mingle together. It's going to be a cool afternoon. We're going to have a panel of speakers. There's going to be a great lunch. It's going to be a really good event. So I believe Brittany is putting the registration link in the chat. So you can click that to learn more and check it out. And we really do ask if you happen to know students in that area or industry folks in your company or farmers, help us spread the word about this event, and that way they can check it out themselves too. And then speaking of community, we are only a few months away from our 2026 Forward Together National Conference. Whoop. That is taking place October 27th through the 29th this year in Lexington, Kentucky. This is our premier event for Connection and Growth. There's going to be tons of hot topic speakers and panels, activities, networking, headshots, just a lot of movers and shakers all in one room. And we're currently calling for sponsors to help us shape what the sessions and the vision is going to look like for 2026. So if your company is interested, please reach out to me directly. But otherwise, everyone else, please keep a close watch on your email and our social media channels, because we will be opening registration soon. And make sure that you write down October 27th through the 29th in your calendar today to save that date. And then finally, in honor of the International Year of the Woman Farmer. If you didn't know, that is designated this year in 2026. But Dairy Girl Network has launched a really special storytelling series titled Taking Root and Growing Legacy. This storytelling project that we're hosting showcases really the very heart of our mission. And we've been conducting real world interviews with dairy women across the country, exploring their personal journeys, their stories, leadership, and the legacies that they're building and really that we're building all together as women in dairy. And so with that, we want to hear from you. We invite you to nominate a dairy woman whose story deserves to be shared and celebrated. I believe, again, Brittany's putting the link in the chat where you can explore that nomination form. You can explore, we have a digital storytelling kit that you can use to share your own story on your own platforms in your own way. It's a really great tool to help shape that and guide you. And there's also a list of other dairy industry companies and just egg companies doing really cool things to celebrate this year and to celebrate the International Year of the Woman Farmer. So check out that link and explore some of those stories too. All right, now the reason we're all here, I am really excited to introduce today's speaker. So Alyssa Dietrich Warner is a senior calf and heifer specialist with Cargill, where she optimizes young animal nutrition and management for dairy farms across the Mid-Atlantic. She holds a master's in dairy science from Virginia Tech and a bachelor's in animal sciences from Penn State University. And Alyssa has been with Cargill for over 10 years and feels very fortunate to collaborate with producers and industry partners to help raise healthy, productive calves and heifers. And I know we feel very fortunate that she is joining us today. So with that, Alyssa, I am going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. Thanks for the introduction. I'm excited to talk to everybody today because I am, this topic has been something I've spent a lot of time discussing with producers in the last year or so, talking about colostrum protocols and finding a fit for your unique operation. So that's what we're going to discuss. So we'll cover today the goals of an excellent colostrum protocol. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about pros and cons of different industry recommendations and address some confusion around certain recommendations, finding alternatives that work for your operation. And then we're also going to touch a little bit on colostrum replacer and extended feeding of colostrum, which has been a hot topic lately. And then finally, we'll close it by giving you some tips on how to monitor your success of your protocols. So I want to start off today by polling the audience. I've got a couple questions here, and this first one's going to give me an idea of what the audience is like that I'm talking to today. So first up, how many calves per month are born on your operation? Oh, good. I was hoping to see some diversity here. That's great. Okay, so far it looks pretty mixed. I like that. Okay, very good. So it looks like we have some diversity, Amanda. I think this is nice. We'll move on to the next question. So next question is, when was the last time you made a change to your colostrum protocol? Oh, someone changed their protocol not very long ago. Okay. Good. Some diversity here too. Looks like a lot of you have changed it in the last year. So it's good. It's probably top of mind, but maybe some variation there on when we would have changed protocols last. Okay, very good. I think we can keep moving on. Thank you. Got a couple questions later on, but we'll keep moving here. So, goals of a successful colostrum protocol. What should this protocol do? One, we need the protocol to provide sufficient antibodies. We need that colostrum to provide plenty of IgG in a timely manner to the calf in order to achieve excellent transfer of passive immunity. We need that protocol to be executed cleanly and consistently, and we need the employees who are doing that to understand how and why they're utilizing that protocol. The colostrum protocol should not transmit disease to a calf. It shouldn't cause any physical harm. It shouldn't cause any digestive upset. And sometimes if we have things a little off, we can have some issues that maybe do create some challenges for the calf. We want to avoid that. So we're going to review a little bit on the immune system and how colostrum fits into the immune system for the calf. So antibodies, IgG, for example, you're going to hear me use antibodies and IgG kind of interchangeably. IgG is going to be the most prevalent antibody in colostrum. Antibodies are part of passive immunity. So they're on this side of, I'm trying to get my laser figured out here. Okay, they're on this side of types of immunity. They are acquired by the calf by receiving antibodies directly from colostrum. So an example of this could be in humans. Human babies receive antibodies directly from the mother in utero. We know it's a little different in cows. Passive immunity is really important for the early life of that calf. Active immunity, on the other hand, is going to be longer lasting. That's where the calf is going to develop her own antibodies after she encounters pathogens, gets some kind of infection, she develops her own antibodies, or maybe we give that calf a vaccine, that calf develops her own antibodies. But before we have the chance to do that, we need to give that calf passive immunity via the colostrum. And I'm sure this isn't news to anybody. Calves are born without that passive immunity because the placenta of the cow separates the maternal and fetal blood supply. So the calf does not get those antibodies in utero. Colostrum is the source of those antibodies. That's how we have to transfer that passive immunity to the calf. Calf ingests antibodies, the IgG, which transfer to the blood via the small intestine. So I say all that to give a little bit of an explanation of why we call this transfer of passive immunity, because we are transferring antibodies from the colostrum to the calf. You're going to hear me talk about transfer of passive immunity a lot today, or TPI. Sometimes people refer to this as passive transfer. That's usually the same thing that they're talking about. Okay, so let's think about this in a fun way. Of a calf, sort of, I was thinking of this as like a video game analogy where we're trying to gather up as much IgG as possible when we feed that calf colostrum. And there's lots of factors of why we could boost our IgG to that calf. So if you think of it like a video game, you're kind of trying to gather up tokens and you want as many as possible. The calf wants to absorb as much IgG as possible to have the best shot at a healthy life early in life. And so we'll come back to this later, but I want you to think about it as everything we're doing in our protocol should be contributing toward getting that calf more IgG absorption. And so I'm sure if you are familiar with the Dairy Calf and Heifer Association gold standards, you've seen this, or if you work with a vet who's tested total proteins on your operation, or maybe you test total proteins, you've maybe seen these goals. These are goals to give us an idea of how well calves have that transfer of passive immunity. So there are 4 categories: excellent, good, fair, poor. And essentially you test the serum of calves and it gives you an estimated total protein. So we want as many excellent calves as possible. So you may be familiar with some of these numbers, whether you use the grams per deciliter values, or you can use Brix values as well. I want to start here with a little bit of a history lesson on how these numbers came about. In the past, there was more of a pass-fail recommendation. So historically, acceptable passive transfer, or TPI, was at least 10 grams per liter of IgG in the serum, or if we're looking at total protein, that'd be at least 5.2 grams per deciliter. And the way that number was determined was that calves that achieved that number or above were more likely statistically to stay living. So below that number, those calves are more likely to die. But my question, and I think in the industry we question, is mortality the only thing we care about? Do we just want calves to survive? No, we want calves to be healthy too. We don't want just calves to live. We want them to thrive. So in 2020, a group of industry professionals and researchers reviewed data from USDA that eventually led to these new recommendations we have for the goals of TPI, those higher standards. And the reason they came up with those goals were because they could break out that calves that had higher IgG concentration in their serum, in their blood, were more likely to stay healthy. And so that's how these categories break out. Those calves that achieve that excellent category, they have excellent transfer of passive immunity, they are more likely to stay healthy compared to calves in the good and fair category. And you can see calves in the poor category, like really much more likely to get sick. And this is how that breaks out in numbers too. Same thing, those calves in the excellent category are more likely to stay healthy. They are more likely to stay living. And you can really see that difference. You really don't want any calves in the poor category because they're at a much higher disadvantage. So again, back to these recommendations. DCAJ has these recommendations for what proportion of calves we should get in each of these categories, where we say at least 40% of calves should be in that excellent category, about 30% in good, 20% in fair, and no more, or you don't want any more than 10% in the poor category. My personal opinion is that these goals are very achievable, and I actually think we could set the bar higher. I think we could get well above 50% in the excellent category. I've seen many farms get above 80% of their calves in excellent and no poor calves. With a very consistent and well-designed colostrum protocol, you can get almost all your calves to excellent and good. And I think it's very, very achievable. Okay, next question. We're going to start getting a little more into actual specifics of colostrum protocols. So first question around this, what is the ideal quantity of colostrum you should feed in the first feeding? I'm curious what everybody thinks here. Okay, very cool. I love diverse answers. And then we kind of have a little bit of everything. Looks like a lot of people say about 4 quarts or 4 liters. Some votes for 3. Something else, I'm wondering if that's related to like percent body weight. But this is perfect. I love to see that there's a little bit of lack of consensus around this. I'm trying to get my mouse back to cancel out of there. Okay. We'll just keep moving on. Okay. So it's a little bit of a trick question because you're not going to come away today with an answer from me on exactly what that answer should be. And we're going to talk about quantity. But first, I want to talk about where some recommendations come in around this. So going back to that study, where they set those 4 categories for TPI. Those researchers looked at the calves that scored excellent. They had excellent TPI. How were they fed colostrum? So the calves that were fed colostrum once and achieved excellent TPI were fed an average of 3.3 liters at 2 hours of birth. And that averaged a total of 287 grams of IgG. The calves that were fed multiple feedings of colostrum averaged 5.3 liters total, which was over 400 grams IgG intake. And so the researchers came up with a recommendation of total gram IgG intake. So because these calves scored excellent, the idea is that we want to try and feed them the same way. Getting 300 grams IgG within 2 hours of birth, or a total of 400 grams IgG within 24 hours of birth. Now, one thing I'll say here, I really, really like this recommendation. I think these are excellent goals. And if you are trying to improve your serum total proteins, your passive transfer, and improve your early calf health, I think this is a fantastic starting point. I'll also say, I don't think in every case we need to hit 300 or 400 grams IgG intake to get an excellent TPI. If you do everything else really well, for example, if you get colostrum into the calf very quickly, that can help boost your TPI. And so it's not 100% necessary to get these really high levels of grams of IgG, but it certainly helps give that calf a really good chance. Okay, last question here. What do you all consider good quality colostrum? And I'm trying to get, my mouse is stuck in my oh, here we go. I can't see the poll, but maybe you can tell me. Oh, hold on. I got it. Thank you. Okay, perfect. I got it. Thank you. Okay. So we've got, again, a little bit of diversity. I love it. So some folks are saying above 22% Brix. Or at least 22. Some are saying at least 24. Some say at least 25. And I'm not surprised. I think these are, I would expect there to be some mixed results here too. Excellent. It just goes to show how you can do this in many different ways. All right, so we'll keep moving on. That's the last question. Let me get... My mouse keeps getting stuck. Let's see if okay. We're talking a little bit about total grams IgG, and that's a combination of your volume, how much colostrum you're feeding, and how concentrated that colostrum is in IgG. When we talk about that, we're talking about quality. Higher quality means higher concentration of IgG. I do want to point out too, you hear me use liters and quarts sort of interchangeably. I know they're not the same, and it depends on what you're using. If you use bottles, you may be using quarts as a measure, and if you use bags, maybe you use a liter. They're very, very similar, so I'm going to continue to use them sort of interchangeably, but 1 liter is slightly bigger than 1 quart. I made this table a few years ago to give you an estimate of how many grams total IgG you can provide based on how much you're feeding and what that Brix reading is. So higher Brix readings are going to have a higher concentration of IgG. And so you can see you maybe don't have to feed quite as much if you have a really high quality colostrum versus lower quality colostrum, your total IgG is going to be less. In the light green, that's anything that's hitting 300. Dark green would be 400. So for example, maybe you feed 4 quarts in the first feeding, and then you follow up with a second feeding, and within the first 24 hours, You can hit that total 400 grams IgG if you've got 24 bricks or above. So just an example where quality does really affect maybe how much volume you're feeding. And so with that being said, I think when you are designing your goal quantity in the first feeding and your quality breakpoint, you need to consider them together, because how many grams IgG we're feeding a calf is a combination of both quality and quantity. So let's get into a little bit more on quality specifically. Again, IgG is the most prevalent antibody in colostrum. Traditionally, good quality colostrum was considered at 50 grams per liter of IgG or above. I think this is outdated at this point. If you go back, you may still see this number, but if you relate this to bricks, which everybody was saying we need at least 22 bricks, 50 grams IgG is actually correlated with 20 bricks. So I think that's an outdated number. Side note, this calculator comes from calfnotes.com, which is written and published by Dr. Jim Quigley. It is a free resource. If you're not familiar with calfnotes.com, check it out. He has fantastic information around calf-related anything with a lot of research behind it. So check that out, because you can learn a little more on how bricks is related to colostrum concentration of IgG. So I'm going to say let's update that recommendation that we want a more concentrated colostrum. And the quality of colostrum cannot be determined by looking at the thickness or color. You can't look at it and say, oh, this stuff is more yellow, it means it's better. That's not necessarily true. Quality also varies between cows and seasons. So if you have in the past tested colostrum and you found that all your colostrum tested really well, so you stopped testing it, I would encourage you to go back and at least test it for a week every quarter, so that you capture any changes from season to season, because there can be a lot of changes between seasons. And it should go without saying that colostrum should be sourced from a healthy cow and be free of blood, debris, or mastitis. We don't want that colostrum to transmit disease. So if we know cows are positive for certain pathogens that can be transmitted through colostrum, we want to avoid feeding that raw colostrum to calves as well. Measuring colostrum quality. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this on how to measure quality. My best recommendation is to use a Brix refractometer. It's easy to use. They have both these optical versions that you would look through and a digital version. Digital versions are really easy to use because it gives you a digital number. The optical ones, you have to sort of, there's maybe a little bit of fuzziness and maybe not quite as easy to read. But if you don't currently test colostrum, I would recommend starting with an optical refractometer just because the cost is so low. You can get these on Amazon for less than $20. So they're very accessible. Temperature is technically important here of the colostrum you're using. You want to read the instructions on the refractometer, but you're only using a few drops of colostrum. So it's not like you have to heat up or cool colostrum to get it to the right temperature. On the other hand, a colostrometer is sort of a more traditional way to measure colostrum. I do not prefer a colostrometer for several reasons. So this is a different kind of tool. It's measuring specific gravity. It is more temperature sensitive, and you use more colostrum. So you need to make sure that temperature is within the guidelines of the recommendations on that tool. And again, it's outdated, in my opinion, using this traditional 50 grams per liter IgG as a good cut point. So there's really not a quantitative way on a lot of these to measure what the quality is exactly. It just kind of gives you green or red, so good or bad. And usually that good just means 50 grams IgG. So I don't recommend these as much. I like the refractometer. Now, there has been some criticism on using a refractometer, that it's not a perfect tool. It definitely is not perfect, but I still believe this is the best tool we have on farm to assess quality of colostrum quickly. So the refractometer was designed to measure how light bends through a liquid. It's not directly measuring IgG. These tools are actually used in other industries like beer and wine making to measure sucrose. But dairy industry is very creative, right? We have lots of creative people that found that there's a very strong correlation between certain Brix numbers and IgG concentration. And so when we say 25 Brix is about 75 grams IgG, it's all based on an equation with a strong correlation, but there is error. All that to say, you measure one sample and one sample alone, you may have some error and you may not be specifically spot on. But if you are consistent with measuring your colostrum quality with a Brix refractometer, you will get really close to having a good idea of how high your quality of colostrum is. So I still encourage farms to use it. It's really inexpensive, really easy to do. One other point here, make sure you calibrate your refractometer. I've had a lot of discussions lately with farms about this. Make sure you calibrate it. If you're not sure how, we can talk about that toward the end of this call. Okay, another factor we haven't talked about yet is timing of colostrum. How quickly after birth do we feed colostrum to the calf? So as that calf ages, in the first 24 hours, her ability to absorb IgG via the small intestine reduces very quickly. We have a reduced apparent efficiency of absorption, AEA. That literally just means if we feed a calf, for example, 200 grams IgG, and she absorbs 100 grams IgG, she had a 50% AEA, 50% efficiency. That efficiency reduces over time. So we want to get the most out of that colostrum by feeding that colostrum early, as soon as we can. Here's another study that demonstrates this, where calves are fed under an hour. At 6 hours or 12 hours, you can see that feeding colostrum within 1 hour after birth resulted in more IgG absorption. You can see the IgG concentration in the blood, and therefore, again, more efficiency of absorption. So timing is a really important factor too when we're designing our protocols. So now we're going to jump to talking a little more about industry recommendations and how to navigate these for your operation. I feel very strongly that cookie cutter protocols don't work, that every farm is sort of unique and every farm has a different ability to execute different things. So you can have a perfect protocol on paper, but that doesn't mean it's going to get done correctly. If I go to 10 dairy farms and I give them the exact same colostrum protocol recommendation, I'm not taking into consideration the limitations and resources that are different between each farm. A lot of that's related to labor. So there are a lot of differences in labor capabilities and patience of individuals. So some farm workers are very, very patient. And if you have those employees on your staff, consider yourself very lucky, because young calves are very frustrating and they take a lot of time. Labor availability also varies a lot, especially between large farms and small farms. Small farms just don't have the ability to have people there all the time that can do those jobs. And there's a lot of difference in experience as well. So some employees we're going to trust a little more to make a judgment call and adapt to a changing situation. Some employees, we want them to follow the protocol exactly the same every time. And the other reason why I don't think we need cookie cutter protocols is that we can achieve excellent transfer of passive immunity in a variety of ways. It does not have to be one protocol. Colostrum feeding especially the first feeding, is an extremely high priority. So we don't want excuses why we can't get it done right. But just because it's high priority doesn't mean we can't adapt the protocol to work for the farm. I truly believe the protocol has to work for the farm. So one of the recommendations that creates a lot of confusion is quantity in the first feeding. How much volume do we feed in that first feeding? And this recommendation changes depending on who you ask. The answers in that poll were really variable, and I'm not surprised. There's a lot of confusion of what's the right quantity. So one of the really common recommendations is feeding a full gallon, 4 quarts in the first feeding. And I would say most of my time at Cargill, I've heard that recommendation and I've recommended it. However, in the last few years, I've come across more vets or producers who are hesitant to feed that amount of colostrum to every calf. And part of that reason is about this report that has came out in 2024 that's a little scary about some of that. So we're going to talk a little more about that report, but I want to go through pros and cons that I see here of this protocol. So if you are feeding 4 quarts, 1 full gallon of colostrum in the first feeding, the good thing is you're providing plenty of IgG with whether you have high quality or medium low quality colostrum. You have a little extra security built in if you're not testing your colostrum for some reason. And if you're only feeding 1 feeding of colostrum, then you know you're feeding plenty of volume. The downsides, if you're feeding calves through a bottle versus tube feeding, if you're feeding through a bottle, a lot of calves are not going to voluntarily drink 4 quarts of colostrum. It's difficult to get that into every single calf. It's not considering the size of the calf. If you have a small calf, is 4 quarts too much? Maybe. And then again, here's this question of digestive issues. So I'm going to talk about that report a little bit. The question being, is 4 quarts too much or even more? Sometimes people are feeding more colostrum than this. In this example, Dr. Don Sockett had a report where a newborn calf had developed severe colic due to this large curd of colostrum that solidified in a way in the abomasum. This calf was tube fed 4 liters of colostrum at 30 minutes after birth, and then another 2 liters 6 hours later. So quite a lot of colostrum in a short amount of time. The calf was in pain, had abdominal distension, and they actually euthanized the calf. The conclusions of this report are that maybe this is too much colostrum, especially tube fed. Can this large volume of colostrum lead to digestive issues? And if nothing else, maybe a lot of discomfort to the calf. Kind of scary stuff. So this is something that if you've heard now people recommending not feeding 4 quarts, it may be related to this idea. So kind of in the same vein, one way to consider, are we feeding the right amount for the size of the calf, is to go off of percent birth weight, percent body weight. And so there's a study done in 2014 that looked at 3 different percent body weights, 7, 8.5, and 10% body weight. And then they also looked at what subsequent feedings of transition milk do for calves as well. So I made a little table here to give you an idea of how much colostrum this is for each treatment, because it's kind of hard to do the math in your head. But if you look at an 80-pound calf, 10% birth weight is going to be about 4 quarts. So that's for, a nice sized calf. What they actually found was that the calves in this medium group, the 8.5% birth weight colostrum, had the highest serum IgG. Very interesting. They also found, not surprisingly, that calves fed multiple feedings of transition milk were healthier, had better ear, eye, and nasal scores. So results and conclusions from these authors that feeding that middle 8.5% birth weight volume is ideal. So interesting, because we do also hear the recommendation that 10% birth weight is ideal. So what's the difference here? I will point out to also consider in this study, in every treatment, the colostrum had excellent quality. So it was all above 100 grams per liter IgG, really, really good quality stuff. So again, it's not just volume and it's not just quantity, it's the combination. How many total grams IgG are we giving these calves? With that high quality stuff, that 8.5% birth weight is like spot on. We're getting plenty of IgG. We're even getting plenty of IgG in the 7% calves. In each of these groups, calves averaged excellent TPI. There were no calves that failed. There were no calves in that poor category. And then some other questions related to quantity to think about. So is there sort of, going back to this clotting thing, if that colostrum clots and sits in the abomasum, does that slow down emptying to the small intestine where IgG are absorbed? That could potentially be the reason why this larger quantity had a little lower absorption. Maybe there's a delayed factor there. There's also this idea that the small intestine can get oversaturated with IgG, that we feed more and more IgG and the calf can't absorb more. That's possible too. What I would say here, because now I'm presenting a lot of different ideas and not giving you a clear protocol. What I would say here is we want our goal to be, how do we get a lot of IgG to a calf? Whether that is through really high quality colostrum or through a pretty large volume of colostrum in the first 24 hours. We kind of need to find the right balance. We don't want to overfeed tons and tons of volume to small calves ever. Like, we don't want to be feeding a 60-pound calf 4.5 liters of colostrum. We want to make sure we're providing a high volume of total IgG. Okay, so again, when you're choosing how much quantity you want to feed a calf, I want you to choose this with the context of these 4 things. What is the size of the calf? So again, you're going to see the recommendation 10% body weight. That means that we're feeding 3 quarts for every 60 pounds of calf. If you have really high quality colostrum, maybe you can get away with feeding a little lower volume. Again, we're trying to aim for that 300 to 400 grams IgG in the first 24 hours. If you feed multiple feedings of colostrum, you are boosting your calf's immunity. You're providing other good stuff too besides IgG. And so you're giving that calf a really high chance of really good health. And that, if you're already doing that, you may not have to feed such a large volume in the first feeding. And then the last thing is maybe a little more like grounded in reality. How much colostrum do you have on farm? Do you have enough to feed your calves what you want to feed them? If you're trying to feed 6 quarts in the first 24 hours, do you have the supply? You may not have the supply, or certain times of the year you don't. So you want to work with what you've got here as well. Okay, so revisiting that analogy of the calf in the video game who's trying to collect as many IgG tokens as possible. That's the goal. How do we get as much IgG as we can? Let's address a few industry recommendations and the challenges that come with them. So first recommendation, we're going to try and feed all calves within 2 hours of birth. And I don't think there's much debate on this one. Everybody agrees we need to feed calves quickly after birth. The problem is there are challenges with this on a lot of farms. And you may find that your little IgG token calendar, maybe your calves aren't able to get the full amount of IgG we're trying to get them because there's these challenges. So it's difficult to do this, to feed calves quickly when calves are born at all hours of the day and night. On a smaller farm with limited labor, this may not align with prompt milking of the dam and prompt feeding of the calf because we don't have employees there all the time. Another challenge is that we might not be able to get a calf to drink 3 or 4 quarts of colostrum within 2 hours, especially for feeding through a bottle. That may be really challenging to do. And a lot of employees don't have the patience or they don't have the time to do that. So how can we boost our IgG and work with what we've got here? Options, I highly recommend stockpiling colostrum, either in the freezer or fridge. So when a calf is born at night or whatever hour, you do not have to milk the cow to get your colostrum. I know some farms prefer to feed dams colostrum to that calf. I'm really not aware of any research that says that's critical. I think if you are feeding colostrum from a cow on your farm, that's good quality colostrum, that calf is going to do great. Store your colostrum so it's available. If you have a challenge actually getting the volume into that calf in a timely manner, consider tube feeding your first feeding as a standard protocol. And then again, if timing is a challenge and you know you're not able to consistently get colostrum in 2 hours, feed that 400 grams total IgG in the first 24 hours as your goal. Because if first feeding is delayed, your efficiency of absorption is going down. You want to maybe feed a little more IgG to make up for that. Okay? So there's ways to work through this. I'm going to address a little bit, because I mentioned it here, bottle feeding versus tube feeding. We get tons of questions on this. There is a difference. So if the calf is suckling through a nipple, that esophageal groove is going to close and the colostrum goes to the abomasum. That's where we want the colostrum to go. If we tube feed the calf, we are tube feeding that colostrum directly to the rumen. That's not where the colostrum is supposed to end up. Ultimately, we need to go to the small intestine, right? But we needed to go to the abomasum first. The good news is that after about 0.4 of a liter, the rumen sort of fills up. And so the colostrum is going to get to the abomasum. So it will eventually get where it needs to go. And you can see this is true in this the results of this study that compared calves' serum IgG, so how well they absorbed IgG, whether they were fed via tube feeder or bottle. There's really no difference. So we'll still get really good results tube feeding calves. There is a difference though, and there are good and bad things about either option. So tube feeding, I like tube feeding for these reasons. It's fast. We don't have to have maybe as much time or patience, and we can more easily get the calf to consume the full quantity we want to feed that calf. Downsides to this, obviously there are risks for errors. I know a lot of people have a fear of putting the tube down the trachea and drowning a calf very quickly. That's maybe not super common. It can happen, but some of these other things are more common, I would say. So if you have a tube feeder that's really rough and it could cause some physical damage to the esophagus, we don't want that. That could create problems down the road for that calf. If you use a tube feeder without a clamp, or you pull that tube out really fast and there's still fluid in the tube, it's going to go down the throat and the calf can breathe that in, causing some aspiration pneumonia. We don't want that. That's no good. I think with tube feeding too, it's very easy if you're not measuring the temperature of your colostrum to feed colostrum that's too hot or too cold. Both of those are bad. We want that colostrum to be between 100 and 105 degrees. So we want to make sure we're measuring colostrum temperature. Tube feeders are sometimes difficult to clean, and we already addressed this risk for overfeeding. If we feed really high amounts to small calves, maybe we have some digestive issues. Bottle feeding. The good things about bottle feeding, you don't need any specialized training to do it. Most people are more comfortable bottle feeding. Colostrum more naturally is going to enter the abomasum. And you may also find that calves drink a little better voluntarily for the next feeding if they're bottle fed. Downsides here though, the time and the patience. I'm going to say it over and over again. This is a big labor suck. And it can be a challenge. You may have to follow up with more feedings if you didn't get that volume in that first feeding. And then the other question is like, what do you do with half a bottle of cold colostrum? You try and feed a calf a bottle, she drinks half, now it's cold. We really don't want to be warming up and cooling down and warming up and cooling down colostrum. So it can create some waste or challenges of what to do there. There are problems, challenges with equipment for either method. So I see this a lot. Producers cutting nipples wide open or letting them get worn out. This will create a lot of risk for aspiration pneumonia. You don't want to do this. I know I can't tell producers to never cut nipples. If you have to cut nipples, don't tell me about it. Just do it a very tiny amount. Throw them away when they look anywhere close to that. Tube feeders, these are two different farms, but similar situations. They get scratched really, really easily. Those scratches can cause damage to the throat of the calf. They also make it very difficult to clean and keep clean your esophageal feeders. So throw them out if they get anywhere close to that. Okay, next example of a recommendation. Adjust the volume of first feeding based on the individual calf birth weight. We talked about this already. If you go by birth weight, you're feeding an appropriate amount of colostrum to that calf. And then we also sort of avoid the risk of overfeeding a volume of colostrum. This is difficult when you don't have the ability to weigh calves. Now, some people can say, just weigh every calf, get a weigh tape, you'll get a good estimate. But maybe that's just not practical at your farm. The other challenge is that it's kind of a complicated protocol. Maybe it's complicated to make that adjustment every time. One calf is getting 3.5 liters, one calf's getting 3 liters, one calf's getting 4. It may be really confusing and we can't execute that well. So options to do better and be more consistent. Focus on feeding a consistent quantity in the first feeding. If you know you have some small calves and you're afraid to feed too much volume, feed 2.5 to 3 quarts in the first feeding instead of 4, regardless of how big that calf is. Also, then maybe you prioritize higher quality colostrum. So you feed colostrum that's at least 25 bricks because you know you're not feeding a really high volume. Or you use a colostrum supplement product to boost that quantity or the quantity of total IgG. And then the other way to get through this is you offer a second feeding of colostrum 8 to 12 hours later. So we're getting that close to that 400 grams total IgG in the first 24 hours. So these are options where we're not wanting to feed a super high amount. All right, finishing up here, I just want to touch on a few things related to this because I get a lot of questions around colostrum replacer. Regarding colostrum replacer, if you don't take anything else away from this, what I want you to remember is to go look at the colostrum replacer label of what you're using and understand how many grams IgG it provides calves. So this example, I was at a farm and they were feeding one package of this is 50 grams IgG. That is not enough. If you read the recommendations, it's saying to feed 4 packets. So if you feed colostrum replacer that's an individual packet, read the label and make sure you're providing enough IgG. Should we be feeding that goal of 300 grams IgG with colostrum replacer? That's a lot. In my opinion, we probably don't need to feed that 300 grams total IgG. Some colostrum replacers are really concentrated in IgG and have a higher efficiency of absorption. So you may not need to feed quite as much. If you're not sure about the one you're feeding, ask your supplier. And is it worth the super high cost to feed 300 grams IgG? Probably not. If we do really, really well with cleanliness, timeliness, we probably don't have to do that really high amount with colostrum replacer. What was probably the best option for the calf and for your budget is to use a combination of colostrum replacer and maternal colostrum. So the way you would do this is feed about 50 grams IgG worth of colostrum replacer with lower quality colostrum. So colostrum that tests below 22 bricks. Don't throw out your low quality or your low bricks colostrum if it's clean and comes from healthy cows. Utilize that for second, third, fourth feeding or boost it with colostrum replacer. And we want to be careful when we're measuring total proteins on calves fed colostrum replacer. you will have lower total proteins on these calves because there's less total protein in colostrum replacer. So if your goal is to get 6.2 and above on your TPI guidelines, for colostrum replacer, expect that 5.2 is going to be excellent. Last thing here, extended feeding of colostrum. This is a really hot topic, and I'll stay on for more questions related to this. Feeding colostrum replacer in a small quantity or maternal colostrum for the first 3 days to 2 weeks of life can help reduce diarrhea, antibiotic treatments, and mortality in calves. And there's a couple options on how to do this. You can do this either with colostrum replacer. I would recommend that you feed at least 20 grams IgG per calf per day to see results. If you're adding that powder to a colostrum or with a balancer, you need to reduce how much powder you're feeding in that mix. It is a very expensive protocol, so it's about $4 to $8 per day. If it helps cut back on your mortality, it could be worth it with the high value of calves. If it only helps cut back on scours, there's probably less expensive ways to improve your scours incidence. You could use maternal colostrum as well, but you need a full cup of maternal colostrum, good quality colostrum, to probably see a positive effect. Some farms use an ice cube method where they freeze colostrum in ice cubes. That can work, but you have to be really, really clean about how you do this. And some farms are already feeding fresh cow milk as part of their calf milk pool, and they're probably already getting these benefits. So if you're already doing this, you may already be getting those positive health benefits early in life. So last thing here, how do we monitor the success of the protocols? You want to measure your results, utilize that serum total protein testing, work with your vet to get that figured out, and also track your calf health monthly. If you see a change in your calf disease, maybe we go back to that colostrum protocol to improve it and make sure that it's happening how we think it's happening. You want to manage colostrum inventory well. Do you have enough supply to follow that protocol? If you have a lot of calves that are needing colostrum replacer, maybe your volume isn't a good fit for the supply you have. And then also you want to do regular checks on sanitation. If you work with a calf and heifer specialist, they can help you with this. You want to throw out any old equipment like nipples and tube feeders that are not holding together well. Check your fridge and freezer temps. Check your colostrum temp when you feed it. And then also make sure the amount of volume that you're feeding calves is consistent, especially if you use a bag for storage. You want to make sure that bag is full where it needs to be. This should be continuously improved, right? If a step is being missed, work with your employees to prioritize the most important parts of that protocol, or find an alternative that works for you and them. And that's what I've got here. I'll stay on as long as I need to take questions. I know I'm kind of up on time here.
Perfect. Thanks, Alyssa. If I was just going to ask if we can steal a little bit more of your time, because there was a lot of info there and we've got a really good crowd on. So with that, I do want to open it up for Q&A. So if anyone has a question for Alyssa that they'd like to ask, you can either unmute yourself now or use the chat feature. Any questions for Alyssa?
I have a question.
Yes.
So I'm really interested in colostrum management for dairy cross beef calves. And this is sort of off topic, but actually directly on topic in a way. Do you think there's an opportunity for dairy producers to actually do blood protein levels and demonstrate to calf buyers that these calves have that they have documentation of passive transfer? And in the event that we do that, how much more can a dairy producer demand for the price?
I think that's a really good question, because I do, and I don't know if I have the exact numbers, what the value would be. But like I said, there's a tight relationship relationship between mortality, we know if those calves fail, they are much more likely to die, or we can predict we'll have a higher mortality. So to me, that's the easiest way to put a value on it, right? If you can expect X% more mortality with anything that fails, maybe you do the reverse to figure out the math. The morbidity is a little more wishy-washy, maybe not as easy to put a value on, and certainly not as big of a value to someone buying calves. But I think you could figure out a value by sort of back calculating it that way. One thing I'll say I think is difficult is looking at one individual calf TPI result is not going to tell you exactly, it's not a really good predictor of that calf's health specifically. I encourage producers to look at calves as sort of a group to assess their whole program. So if you test 10 calves, it's probably going to tell you more about that group as a whole than just one calf. That doesn't really answer your question, but I think that's a really a more reliable way to understand this group of calves versus an individual one. I think there's value there. You'd probably have to ask someone who's actually buying calves how much they value it, but I think at least the mortality is pretty proven that, and that's where there's a lot of money, right? Keeping calves alive.
Awesome. There is another question in the chat. This individual says they missed part of the webinar, so sorry if that was already covered. But are there any is there an on-farm way to check the cleanliness of the colostrum that's fed to the calves?
So in my role as a calf and heifer specialist, I do this with the producers I work with. There are two ways to do this. Or two ways that I do it. We have a machine called an ATP meter or an illuminometer. And if you work with someone like me, you may have seen it before. We can swab surfaces and give you an assessment of how clean equipment is. That's not measuring colostrum, that's measuring equipment. But I also do sometimes collect colostrum samples for producers and send them into the lab to get a bacterial, a total plate count. And that is something probably anyone can do. Either your consultant can do that for you, or you can send them in to a lab. And that gives you a good idea of what your bacteria is. I think the industry recommendation is less than 100,000 CFUs per mil. Maybe it's 50,000 now, total plate count. In my personal opinion, we should be able to get below 20,000. So it is definitely a way to do some spot checks.
Awesome. I have a question. So I come from a calf ranch background, and calves are higher right now when compared to what they were during COVID. So do you see on dairies the colostrum protocols changing when calves are higher because they're now worth more when compared to the low prices like they were in COVID?
I would say that's probably true as a whole trend. I think I see producers more willing to invest in young calf health in general, not just colostrum, but other things early on, to make sure that calves are staying healthy. I think I see maybe a little more care for bull calves when calves are really valuable too. And that's maybe a little more like an example might be when bull calves are not as valuable, sometimes the colostrum situation is questionable, or maybe they only prioritize colostrum for female calves. But right now, I would say work with plenty of farms that treat them equally. So yeah, I think that is a little more of a priority when calves are valuable.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Good question.
Awesome. Any other questions for Alyssa? We got time for probably one more. Last call. Okay, so there is a question in the chat. Hello, we pasteurize all of our colostrum in bags in a batch pasteurizer and cool the bags down in buckets of cold water before putting the bags in a fridge or freezer. We're having a lot of calves coming soon. How can we best heat colostrum to drinking temperature without a machine?
Okay, great. So the best way to heat colostrum in a bag is, and I'm assuming you have something like a perfect udder bag, is with a water bath. And you don't want your water to be crazy, crazy hot. So I would recommend no warmer than 140 degrees of your water, Fahrenheit. I know you're saying without a machine. There are options that are really low cost, in my opinion. I've seen plenty of farms use a sous vide cooker as a way to control water temperature in either like a cooler system or a bucket. And the advantage to that is that you don't let the water get too hot. If the water's too hot, you're going to denature some antibodies, and we don't want to do that. So something like a sous vide cooker is like less than $100. That'll control your water temperature. And then when your colostrum obviously would cool your water down, it's going to keep that water temperature the same. So it's kind of an efficient way. It's like a little homemade water bath. If you have questions about how to do that specifically, my email address is on the screen. Anybody can email me and I can point you in the right direction.
Perfect. All right. With that, Alyssa, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, Cargill, for sponsoring this webinar. For everyone still on, thank you for your questions and your interactions. The recording for this webinar will be coming to your inboxes next week, along with a little goodie piece of written material from Alyssa attached to that email, as well as like an added bonus. So be on the lookout for that. But otherwise, thank you so much. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend and enjoy hopefully some nice weather by you as well. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.